Mubama, cheesemongers! My name's Adam Moskowitz, and I'm here today to share my ruminations on what it means to be a cheesemonger. My goal is to inspire and motivate you into thinking differently about cheesemongering. First, a little bit about me. I've been in the cheese business my whole life. I own and operate Larkin Cold Storage, which is a cheese warehouse, as well as Columbia Cheese, which is a cheese importer, and I created the Cheesemonger Invitational, which is a competition that celebrates cheesemongers. Way back in the day, I was a cheesemonger at a little place called Formaggio Essex. Regardless of what I just said, I work for one thing, and that's cheese. We all do. And why do I work for cheese? Well, I've never met anyone on this planet who I like more than cheese. I'm a turophile, and cheese is a perfect food. It's welcome at breakfast, lunch, dinner, snack, and late night snack. But here's the thing, I wasn't always a turophile. There was a time where I hated things like blue cheese. But as a turophile, I learned to love them. So my love for cheese led me down this rabbit hole of when did we start eating cheese? I found foodtimeline.org, which showed me that first we were hunters and gatherers. We traveled around the land looking for stuff to eat. Then we figured out how to grow things and ferment things, and that's where the magic happened. We started creating villages, and we started domesticating animals, and then we created cheese. And that was around 6000 BC. And for thousands of years, basically all we ate was cured meat, cheese, wine and beer, pickles, basically everything that I eat today. But at some point we lost our way and we became insanely disconnected from our food. And today people actually think lab meat is a thing to eat. So I want to better understand, when did this disconnect happen? And I found this incredible slide about the Industrial Revolution. And basically about 200 years ago, we came up with tools that could help us with production. And that was a pretty good year. But then we created the division of labor and people started migrating to the city. And this is when the disconnect of man from the land happened. And then we started creating technology and came up with things like the internet. And now man has even been disconnected from himself. I've met people who care more about their digital avatar than their organic self, which makes me wonder, where are we going? And it looks like we're headed to cyber-physical systems, which is terrifying because that reminds me of Skynet from Terminator, and we know how that ends. Which brings me to cheesemongers. We reconnect people back to their food. We are the bridge to animal and land. And I've discovered that when I go to parties, people are so interested in what I do that they corner me because all they want to do is talk about cheeses. So imagine, life is a stage. Cheese are characters. And cheesemongers breathe life into the characters of cheese. So, I wanted to actually better understand the true definition of monger. So I went to the great Google and it told me that it's a person that trades in a specific commodity. And I find that to be too sterile. The second definition is a person who promotes a specific activity, situation, or feeling. This is what I gravitate to. As a cheesemonger, we get to connect people to some of their most favorite memories, like their first trip to Europe. We get to connect people with each other over a cheese plate. And in fact, we get people to fall more deeply in love with cheese. And all this takes is one friendly sample of cheese. Because a consumer does not know if it's your first day or your last day or how much cheese knowledge you have. If you're behind the counter, in their eyes, you're an expert. So fake it till you make it. Because when you're a cheesemonger, you're expected to be a caretaker, a matchmaker, a terroir tour guide, a food fear therapist, a sensory Svengali, and most important, a storyteller. To be able to tell the story of a cheese, we got to understand where the cheese comes from. So let's look at the maker to monger supply chain. In imported cheese, it's the producer, the exporter, the importer, the distributor, the monger, and then the mouth. This means the cheesemonger is the last stop before the mouth, and a cheese never gets a second chance to make a first impression. That cheese and the families behind that cheese have worked extremely hard to bring that cheese to you. So you determine how that cheese relates to that consumer. The story you tell, the way it looks, the way it tastes is ultimately determined by you. Which makes me think that cheesemongers are like vets, because a cheese can't really speak and consumers think everything is creamy. So you, as the cheese vet, need to diagnose the situation and prescribe the right cheese solution, because people's minds are changed through observation, not argument. If we do our job right, all we have to do is let the cheese do the talking, and we are successful. You may have noticed that I've fallen down the rabbit hole of Will Rogers, which is one of the things I love most about cheese. There are all these wonderful rabbit holes we get to fall into. Now, Will was a really busy guy. He was a cowboy, a performer, a columnist, a commentator, and an actor. But if there's one thing you notice from all of these photos is that Will wore many hats. Just like us, cheesemongers are receivers, doctors, caretakers, marketers, mind readers, performers, and most important, educators. Our job is to take the cheese curious and evolve them into cheese turophiles. But that doesn't happen overnight. When we first meet our consumers, they may be in one of the lower grade schools, because people start off loving things like Kraft Singles and Polly-O string cheese. And our job is to figure out where they are in school and then bring them along grade by grade. Ultimately, we get people to fall in love with cheese that they didn't even know they might like. Because I didn't like blue cheese, and then I had gorgonzola, and then I had Forme d'Ambert, and then I had Cheriboga, and now I love Roquefort. Because that's what we do. We bring them along in school. The beginning grades of school typically revolve themselves around industrial cheese production, which is mass production, very little human contact, and starts with things like Kraft Singles and goes to like 40-pound blocks of cheddar. And then we take them over to the artisan cheese production, which is where the cheese maker and the dairy farmer have a symbiotic relationship, and it's very hands-on. Ultimately, we land them on farmstead cheese production, which to me is the hardest gig in the cheese business. This is when the actual dairy farmer is also the cheese maker. So let's go down the rabbit hole of how cheese is made. Heather Paxson boils it down to 2 paragraphs. Heat milk, sour it by adding bacterial cultures to convert milk sugar lactose to lactic acid. Add an enzyme such as rennet to help coagulate the fermenting milk. Once the milk has set into a gel-like substance, use long blades to cut the curd into pieces and release the whey. Drain salt and pack curds into molds. Endless variations, including the choice to start with goat, sheep, or cow's milk, the selection of added bacterial cultures, the timing and temperature of the steps of the cheese-making process, whether a cheese is eaten fresh or aged for months or even years, results in hundreds, if not thousands, of varieties of cheese. And I even think that is too complicated. Often the simplest is the best. I find many consumers resonate with Little Miss Muffet sat on her tuffet eating her curds and whey. Milk gets separated into curds and whey, and cheese is pressed curd. Cheese is made with only 4 ingredients: milk, cultures, rennet, salt. But if you find somebody really curious about cheese, you can dive deeper into the cultures used, like the starter cultures or the secondary cultures, and the rennet used, like animal, microbial, or vegetal. When it comes to cheese making, all they need to know is that there's 8 simple steps. If it's lactic, there's only 6. But if you notice that they're super curious about cheese, you could dive deeper and start talking about acidification, coagulation, pH balance, draining whey, the effect of salt. But that's only if they really want to know it. When talking about the types of cheese, If they seem just cheese curious, let's keep it simple. Fresh, soft ripened, semi-soft, semi-hard, hard, and blue. But if you're noticing that they want to become turophiles, let's talk about it as fresh, pasta filata, lactic, bloomy, wash rind, uncooked pressed, cooked pressed, and blue. All of this leads me to one question. What type of cheesemonger are you? In my time in the business, I've met all sorts of cheesemongers. I've met the brainiac that thinks words like lipolysis, proteolysis, and staphylococcus are words that the consumer really wants to hear. I've met the distracted ones that are like, excuse me, I'll be with you in a moment. I'm just tick-tocking the boomerang to my book. I've met the shy ones that are like, excuse me, I'll be with you in a minute. I've met the hungover ones that are like, yo, I got wasted last night. I've met the snobby ones that are like, excuse me, sir. But the correct pronunciation is manchego, not manchego. Lastly, the ego-driven ones that are like, no, 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 no. That's not what you want. This is what you want. End of day, ego is not our amigo. This isn't about us. Our role is to foster the connection of the consumer with the cheese. So I implore you, check your ego at the door. Listen to the consumer, watch the consumer, read the consumer, and be the cheesemonger that they need at that time. In conclusion, Will said, a man only learns in two ways, by reading and by association with smarter people. You, the cheesemongers, are the smarter people. The consumer doesn't know if it's your first day or your last day, and you don't need to tell them. Just do your best and let the cheese do the talking. Will said, even if you're on the right track, you'll get run over if you just sit there. Which means never stop learning, never stop growing. There are so many glorious rabbit holes to dig into here in cheese. Lastly, Will said, if you find the right job, you'll never work a day in your life. And what I take from that is that although I have many, 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 many jobs, none of it feels like work. Cheese is my lifestyle. And finally, be like Will. Jump through hoops and over horses to make the consumer happy. Because if the consumer is happy, the cheese is happy, and then the supply chain is happy. Cheesemongers, you are the most important link in the chain. Thank you for fostering meaningful connections between the cheese and the consumer. Good luck, Mubama. Stay tuned for part 2, where we dive deeper into flavor, sampling, and how to become a cheese Jedi, because cheesemongers save the Milky Way.